In this video, we discuss James Joyce and a few of his works. James Augustine Ulysses Joyce, popularly called James Joyce, was born in 1882 and died in 1941. In the video of Virginia Woolf, I told you that Virginia and James Joyce were born in the same year and died in the same year. They were also collaborators and friends. James Joyce was an Irish novelist and poet. He is considered to be the forerunner of modernist movement called stream of consciousness. And about stream of consciousness, I have made a discussion in the video of Virginia Woolf. In France, there occurred a movement called avant-garde or advance-garde. And the writers of this movement were experimental, radical and unorthodox in dealing with their subjects. And this movement came to England under the title Stream of Consciousness. And it was a narrative technique depicting the multitudinous thoughts and feelings that pass through the mind of the characters. In other words, we can say stream of consciousness includes internal monologue. There may be multiple characters and multiple protagonists, and we are not supposed to expect a conclusion in such a kind of novel. The theme of stream of consciousness was developed by William James in 1980 in his book The Principles of Psychology. William James was the elder brother of Henry James, who brought realism in English and American literature. Dorothy Richardson's semi-autobiographical novels under the title Pilgrimage was the first set of stream of consciousness novels. There were 13 novels under the title Pilgrimage. James Joyce was a master of stream of consciousness style of fiction, and he is regarded as one of the most influential authors of the 20th century. Joyce was born in Dublin into a middle-class family, and he excelled at the Jesuit school as a brilliant student and went on to attend University College Dublin. Due to his father's unpredictable finances and alcoholism, the family was forced to move from place to place. In 1904, Joyce emigrated to Europe with his partner Nora Barnacle, who later became his wife. Though they lived in Paris and Zurich, Dublin was always there in the heart of Joyce. And he returned home for a short while as his mother was sick. She died, making him more miserable. At the moment of her death, she wanted Joyce and his brother Stanislaus to kneel and pray for her, which they refused. The Dublin literary circles excluded James Joyce in the beginning. And there was a friend of James Joyce named George Russell who invited him to contribute a story. And the story, The Sisters, was published under the pseudonym Stephen D. Dallas. It was the first story that came in print. And during this period, Joyce wrote poetry. And the first collection was called Chamber Music. It was produced in 1907. It contained 34 love poems plus 2 non-love poems. And he also started writing the autobiographical novel Stephen Hero. And it was later titled The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. In 1905, Joyce sent Dubliners to a publisher Dubliners was a collection of stories. He sent the collection to a publisher. The collection was accepted, but it was turned down. And he had to make long struggles, in fact, to get the collection published. And by this time, he started writing and revising Stephen Hero into a novel. And finally, Dubliners was published in 1914 by the same publisher who had formerly rejected it. In the same year, Ezra Pound chanced to read the first chapter of the portrait of the artist as young man, and he expressed his willingness to publish the novel in his magazine, The Egoist. Joyce's first collection of stories came out in 1914 under the title Dubliners. There were 15 short stories depicting Irish middle-class life in the early years of the 20th century. And many of the characters in the Dubliners later appear in his novels, like Ulysses. The initial stories in the collection are told by child protagonists. As the stories continue, they deal with the lives of older people also. And when we consider a few of the stories included in the Dubliners, there is the first story, The Sisters. And it was formerly published through a friend named George Russell. And this story is about a boy who comes to learn about the death of a priest whom he had befriended, and visits the house of the priest and finds the old man's sisters. And there is another story called Araby. Here we come to find a boy falling in love with the sister of his friend, but fails in his quest to buy a worthy present for her, and he makes ransacking in the Araby market for a worthy present for his lover. And there is also another story under the title Evelyn. A young woman weighs her decision to flee Ireland with a sailor, whether to remain in Ireland or to escape from there. And there is also another story under the title Two Gallants. There are two men, Lenchen and Corley. They find a maid who is willing to steal from her employer, who is prepared to elope with the men. And there is another story called Counterparts. And there is a clerk named Farrington, an alcoholic clerk, who works in an office. And he takes out his frustration which he had to face in the office on his son Tom. He beats his son Tom. And there is also another popular story, a long story, under the title The Ditch. And here we come to find Gabriel Conroy attending a party, and later as he speaks with his wife, has an epiphany about the nature of life and death. And this story is the longest of the stories in Dubliners, and it has been classified as a novella. And in 1916, James Joyce came out with his novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And the earlier title of the novel was Stephen Hero. And it is to be considered as a constable roman. So, in a constable roman, there will be the birth, the growth, and the maturity of the hero into an artist. If the birth, growth, and maturity of any person is described, it is called Bildungsroman. But if the growth is into a writer, the novel is to be called a constable roman. This novel, The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, is both a Bildungsroman and constable roman. It speaks about the growth of the hero into his maturity, as well as the growth of the hero into an artist. And the protagonist is Stephen D. Dallas. Stephen D. Dallas is the alter ego of James Joyce. It's an autobiographical novel. And the novel opens with Stephen's childhood. Stephen was the eldest son of Simon and Mary D. Dallas. They were Irish Catholics with 9 other children. And Stephen was the eldest. The childhood of Stephen is described with a vocabulary befitting his age, using baby talks in the beginning. And the opening of the novel is a presentation of a boy's talk. So the lines are, once upon a time and a very good time. It was, and this Muku that was coming down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Takku. His father told him this story. He was Baby Takku. Once UGC asked this question. So UGC gave the first lines of the novel and asked from where the lines are taken. Once upon a time and a very good time it was. And this Muku that was coming down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Takku. His father told him the story, and he was the Baby Takku. As a boy, Stephen attends the Jesuit-run Clongowes College, where the intellectually gifted boy suffers the ridicule of his classmates and the corporal punishment of the Jesuit authorities. And Stephen's father gets into debts, and the family finally leaves the pleasant suburban home and moves to settle in Dublin. And during a Christmas holiday, Stephen comes to attend a dinner at his home. And there is a heated debate among the members who attended the dinner. There was also the governess named Dante. And she was originally named Mrs. Riordan. And she is a dedicated Catholic, and during the dinner, he strongly supports the Catholic faith. And they speak about Charles Stuart Parnell, the Irish political leader. Even though he is not a character in the novel, Charles Stuart Parnell is not at all a character in the novel, but the other characters in the novel speak eloquently about him. Charles Stuart Parnell led the Irish Parliamentary Party until he was driven out of the party. He was driven out of public life after his affair with a married woman becomes exposed. And during the dinner, they speak about Charles Stuart Parnell also. And when Stephen grows, so he receives a scholarship and becomes able to attend Belvedere College, where he excels academically and becomes a class leader. And when Stephen gets a cash prize from the college, he squanders the money to see prostitutes. And by the time Stephen had a crush on a neighborhood girl named Emma Clary, but he can't write a poem for her. And Stephen remembers an incident in the first term in his school. A teacher found heresy in Stephen's essay. It was the first time he heard that such things can be considered heresy. Stephen refused to say Tennyson a better poet than Byron, though Byron was a heretic. And Stephen had such experiences at the Belvedere College. And in the Belvedere College, he was even beaten by a teacher for breaking his spectacles. In fact, to keep himself away from his studies, the teacher accused that Stephen had broken his glass, and he was beaten by the teacher. And Stephen made a train journey with his father Simon de Dallas, and they went to Cork. His father had many friends at Cork, and he went out, in fact, to meet his friends. And Stephen was actually embarrassed by the nostalgia of his father, who used to give Stephen stereotyped advice. And he images of death and learns that his uncle Charles is dead. And childhood memories seem very dim to James, to Stephen. Joyce is actually the alter ego of Stephen de Dallas. And he remembers at Belvedere College, the anatomy lab, where he finds the word fetus written on the desktop. And on finding the word fetus, he gets into an epiphany. Epiphany is quite normal in the life of Stephen, getting into sudden feelings. Stephen falls into a variety of sins, gets nightmares and confusions. And finally he goes for confession. And he becomes fanatically pious and spends his time in the church. He imposes self-discipline also. And the school director, on finding Stephen sitting in the church, thinks that he wishes to go for priesthood. But Stephen is actually not interested in getting into the profession of a priest. And while walking in a lane, Stephen gets again an epiphany. He realizes that simple smells like overripe cabbages to the stale odor of cathedral halls. He prefers simple smells like overripe cabbages to the smell found in the cathedrals, the stale smell found in the cathedral. And as Stephen is about to join the university, he feels restless. He imagines himself escaping like the mythical Daedalus, who made a pair of wings to escape from his prison. In the Name, we come to find that there is Daedalus, and the story of Icarus and Daedalus is falling into the water. And here we remind the name of the central character. The protagonist is Stephen de Dallas. And while at the Belvedere College, he had an epiphany again. On finding a beautiful girl wading in the water, he gets into another epiphany. And while studying at the university, the lectures seemed very boring to Stephen. He comes into company with a group of friends. There were many young men, and Cranley becomes his best friend. Lynch, there is another friend who is interested in listening to Stephen's theory of aesthetics. And there is another friend named David, a simple boy with a great love for Ireland. And there is a pretentious boy named Temple, who has got admiration for Stephen. And there is also McCann. He tells Stephen that he is antisocial and anti-democratic. Stephen has no interest in Irish nationalism. His interest is in beauty and aesthetics. And he has friends, Cranley, Lynch, Davin, Temple, and McCann. They are the friends of Stephen at the Belvedere College. And Stephen's discovery of himself seemingly very interesting. He sees Emma Clary and feels speechless. but writes a poem for her. And Stephen sits on library steps and watches birds flying through the air. And he talks to Cranley about Easter rituals, and Cranley wants him to return home to attend the Easter rituals. But Stephen expresses his disbelief in religion. And there are long discourses on religion, politics, family, and Ireland. Stephen recognizes his need to be independent. And like Daedalus, Stephen makes his way out of the trap of Ireland. He flies away to become a writer. And the novel thus comes to its close. And the novel portrayed the artist as a young man has got an epigraph also. And it is taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And the line is, and he turned his mind to unknown arts. And this is what actually we come to find at the end of the novel. The protagonist decides to leave Ireland, to fly to the world of freedom, to become a writer. In fact, the epigram is very significant. It is taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And the line is, and he turned his mind to unknown arts. And in the novel, there is a reference made to Shelley's poem, To the Moon. And this became a popular novel, and it established the name of James Joyce as a popular novelist. In 1922, James Joyce came out with his novel, Ulysses, one of the most controversial of his literary works. And it was a modernist novel, first serialized in the American journal, The Little Review, in 23 installments. After the 13th episode, the publishers were put to trial and fined for publishing obscene material.